What's up, everybody? Welcome back to our Kratom Addiction and Recovery Daily Devotional series. So we're starting a new study in Job today. Yesterday, we went over a general overview of what to expect in this study, and today we're going to get started in chapter 1. There was once a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. He was blameless, a man of complete integrity. He feared God and stayed away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, and 500 donkeys. He also had many servants. He was, in fact, the richest person in that entire area. Job's first test. One day, the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. "Where have you come from?" the Lord asked Satan. Satan asked the Lord, "I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on." Then the Lord asked Satan, "Have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil." Then Satan replied to the Lord, "Yes, but Job has one good reason to fear God. You have always put a wall of protection around him and his home and his property. Excuse me. You have made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But reach out and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." "All right, you may test him," the Lord said to Satan. "Do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but don't harm him physically." So Satan left the Lord's presence. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the older brother's house, a messenger arrived at Job's home with this news: "Your oxen were plowing with the donkeys feeding beside them, and then you were raided. Everything was stolen and killed in all of your farmlands. I am the only one who escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news: "The fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up your sheep and all the shepherds. I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." And while he was still speaking, a third messenger arrived with this news: "You have been raided and all your camels have been stolen and all of your servants have been killed. I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." And while he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news: "Your sons and daughters were feasting in their oldest brother's home. Suddenly, a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed and all your children are dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you." Job stood up and tore his robe in grief. Then he shaved his head and fell to the ground to worship. He said, "I came naked from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Praise the name of the Lord." In all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. Dang, man, that was heavy. That was so heavy. I don't know if any of you have gone through a test similar to this in your addiction or even in life where you have lost a lot. And so let's talk about this and break this down and how it applies to our addiction and recovery process. You know, obviously we are different from Job. Obviously, a lot of us are, not blameless like Job was and, perfect in God's eyes. Obviously, there is some differences in this story, but as we look at these tests that Job is going through right now, there are a lot of things in our lives that we can relate to these tests because all of us endure losses. All of us have changes that go on in our lives that are unexpected, where, we're on top of the world sometimes. I don't know about for you, but for me, I was literally on top of the world when I first found kratom. I was in a point in my work life where I was doing very well. Things were going great with my family. My health was great. And so when kratom came into my life, I was on top of the world, similarly to where Job was. I obviously wasn't, blameless in God's eyes. So I didn't have that going on, but what I had happening in my life at that point was pretty good. And I know that some of you, it may not be that way. Some of you may end up on kratom when, things are not so good. Things weren't perfect in my life. I had just lost my father the year before, and I was navigating like all of that. And yes, there were challenges going on, but all in all, things were really good. And so when kratom came into my life, I didn't expect for what to happen that ended up going on as I got into my addiction. I didn't expect for that to happen. And so when we look at Job's challenges and we look at his tests, I encourage you to think about your own situation right now and think about what could be going on in your life, whether it be losses, whether it be, something with your livelihood that's been affected, whether it be something with your health that's been affected. And, to look at that for a second as we're in this study. And I don't want to just glaze over this whole in the courts of heaven and Satan asking God if he can test Job thing, because I know when we start getting into talk like that it can turn a lot of people off, hearing the word Satan, talking about things that have to do with heaven and, the hierarchy of heaven and the inner workings of those realms. So I know that can turn some people off when we start getting into that. And I also know that it can be really confusing to be whatever, what's that? I can maybe get down with a little bit of faith and some God talk, but once you start talking about Satan and heaven, I know that it can be a turnoff for a lot of people, but I don't want to glaze over it. And I want to look at what this means, on a deeper level, and break this down in relationship to our addiction and recovery. And so, okay, there's good and there's bad in this world. There are things that are going on that are beyond this material realm. And I'm not going to get into it too hard because I've said it before and I'll say it again. That this channel is not focused on the supernatural. This channel is not focused on the demonic. This channel is focused on Jesus, and this channel is focused on the Word. And so I don't like to get too caught up in it, but I also don't deny it either, because there is good and there is evil. And we live in this world that is fallen, meaning that this world is not, all God's. In the beginning of all of this going on, when there was the adversary who is Satan, who fell from heaven, and this world was given to him as his domain. Yes, God created it. Yes, God is ultimately sovereign, but this is a fallen world, and we see that all around us all the time, that everything is dying in this world. And in the material existence of this world, meaning what's concrete, what's flesh and blood, what we see around us, which is the material world, everything is dying. And there's also a corruption to the nature of this world, and we see it in our culture around us. We see it being expressed in people around us. And so there is good and there is evil in this world. And, God is good and Satan is evil. And so if you're not down with, looking at things in that way, in a very basic way, nobody can deny that there is good and bad, good and evil. And so when we look at this, when we look at the adversary going to God and saying, hey, I'm checking out everything that's going on down there, on earth. And there's this dude, Job, who is, blameless and, this upright, upstanding man who is, just living his life almost perfectly. And the only reason why he's doing that is because you've blessed him, God. And I'm bringing this up and we're breaking this down because there is good and evil. And we're never going to understand the inner workings of the heavenlies and the supernatural realms. But this gives us a little bit of insight into when we are living our lives, yes, there is good, there is God, but there is also a counterpart to that. And there is evil in this world, and there is evil as the counterpart to this good. And that God does allow for us to be tested sometimes in our life. Like, the whole point of it too is that God is sovereign. And God does work all things out for good for those who believe. 100%. I've seen it happen so many times in my life. And so when God allows tests, it is ultimately for our best good. And so when there is, the adversary, when there is, evil that is going on in our lives that's either testing us or wearing us down or affecting relationships or affecting our health, God is ultimately responsible for these tests. And it kind of, can be hard to look at it this way sometimes, but the point of it is that there is good and bad. There is good and evil. Kratom itself, I'm trying to choose my words wisely right now, you guys too, because I know again, these kind of topics are very hard to talk about, and they're very hard to articulate when we start getting into this kind of stuff. And but I'm just going to be straight up with you. And again, a disclaimer, as you've heard me say a lot of times before, this is my personal experience too. I am not, it's sitting here saying this is black and white. The word to me is black and white, but as we discuss this and we break it down, this is just us spending time together and me sharing my experience and sharing what I've learned. And so I just want to let you know that too. But, and I want to say too that I'm coming from a background where I was on a spiritual search my whole life, but really intensely these past 20 years. And I grew up loving Jesus. And not because I was raised in a religious home, but because I was introduced to him at a very young age. And I had a really hard childhood and a really hard family life. And from the very beginning, my relationship with Jesus was what was my foundation, and that helped me through a lot of that stuff that I was going through in my life. But as I got older and I got involved in the hippie scene, and I left home at a very young age when I was 16 to travel the country and to follow the Grateful Dead and fish, I started to get involved in the new age and stuff. And so over the next 20 years that followed after that, I was searching many different spiritual paths, and I went into some places in that search where I was getting involved in some really weird stuff spiritually. And so I talk about good and evil. I talk about God and Satan, not because I'm coming from this background where I've been in the church for, my whole life. I'm talking about this because I have lived on the other side of God's protection, and I have gone to places when I was in the New Age where I have been to places in, when I I don't need to get all into it right now, and I apologize if I'm getting off on a tangent, but I have seen and I have been involved in things when it comes to stuff of the spiritual nature, stuff of the supernatural. And I have seen evil, literally met evil face to face. It came disguised as an angel of light, which was the weirdest part of it all. As most of the New Age does come disguised as light, but it is pure evil. And I had the chance to see it, be involved in it, and be delivered from it by the grace of God. And so I speak of evil and I speak of good because I have seen it and interacted with it myself. So I know that this, is a lot to go into real quick, but I just wanted to give you a little background as we talk about some of this stuff, because there is good and there is evil. And I have talked to you guys one-on-one before about how, you see kratom as, pure evil that was disguised as light a lot of times at first. And I also experienced that. And so to bring it back to what we're going into in this study, and, as we talk about Satan, as we talk about God and the heavenly realms and Satan, asking God to test Job, I just wanted to give you a little background of why I feel the way that I do and why I can talk about this and share my experience. So kratom for a lot of us is a test, and kratom for a lot of us is a tool that's used by the adversary. And as with Job, he was tested by all of this. He was tested by these losses that he went through. And that, as we just read here, he lost everything at once. And for me, when I was in my kratom addiction, I had this sparkle phase, which is what I call the first year, where it still had its sparkle and I felt great. But then after I got into the second year, and shortly after I passed that first year, everything started to get really dark really quick. And I lost pretty much everything at once too. And then slowly over the next 2 years, as I was in the last part of my really bad part of my addiction, and then in the last part of my taper, I just kept losing more and more. And so I share my experience because I'm pretty certain, I've talked to some of you too, that a lot of you have lost things as well. And so when we look at this first chapter of Job and we look at these tests that he's going through, we look at, the background of why he's being tested, what this relationship between good and evil, God and the adversary is, and that ultimately God is in control. And ultimately God allows for these tests to happen to us. The difference between us and Job is that, a lot of us, I'm not going to speak for all of us, a lot of us aren't in that standing of we are totally good with God. A lot of us, for me, I was coming out of all of those New Age beliefs. And when I got into kratom was a test for sure, but it was also a consequence to choices that I had made. And I had to accept that. So there's differences between Job's story and our story, but the similarities is that, God allows for these tests to happen. And God is ultimately sovereign in them. And, we can look at how, the other important aspect of this, which we're going to break this first chapter down into today and tomorrow, because we're going over the first part today, and then we're going to go into what's so important about this too, is how Job responded to these tests, which is just absolutely beautiful, because he ultimately just worships God. So we're going to get into that tomorrow. But today we're looking at our tests and our challenges in our addiction and our recovery process. And we are remembering that God ultimately is who allows these tests and who is ultimately sovereign. So I encourage you to think about that today. And as with Exodus, you guys, I'm going to let you know right now, there's a lot of cool stuff that's in this book, but then there's some heavy stuff that we have to take a hard look at ourselves. And we have to take a hard look at, how we've ended up in this addiction. And that's part of, the process of us getting free from this addiction and healing from this addiction and becoming better people from it. So I want to remind you of that. So tomorrow we're going to pick up where Job, how he responds to these tests. And I look forward to getting into that with you tomorrow. So I encourage you to let us know how you're doing in the comments section below, and we'll see you tomorrow. Love you guys. Bye.